Hey everyone, this is Jungkook. Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. Maybe you think idols like me always know what to do. Maybe you assume we can read the weather of our careers the way sailors read the sea, one glance at the clouds, one hand to the wind. And we already know what's coming. Maybe you believe that because I've stood under stadium lights with the sound of thousands shaking through my ribs, I've somehow become immune to uncertainty, to tremors that start in the chest and climb to the throat, to the long nights when a single message sits unsent on a glowing screen. If that's you, then listen closely. Because tonight, I'm going to tell you about a conversation at my mother's kitchen table that split my world in two before and after, and about the weeks that followed when I started to notice patterns I'd been ignoring because I hoped love and loyalty would be enough to carry us. This isn't about schedules, charts, or the usual things people think I lose sleep over. It's not about promotions or fan cams or the way a note sits in the voice when you're tired. It's not even about a comeback. It's more personal than all of that. It's about something that sounds simple when you say it out loud, but feels like lifting a mountain when you try to do it. Choosing what to hold on to when the people you love are moving like weather, beautiful, terrifying, and never under your control. My mother placed a bowl of warm soup in front of me and said, in a voice she saves for moments when she wants me to hear the truth without fighting it, forget Jimin and Taehyung for a while. The word forget landed like a door closing in a quiet house. Steam rose, and for a few seconds I watched it curl and fade as if it could carry the question I couldn't ask. She didn't mean erase. She didn't mean betray. Mothers rarely mean things the way the words come out when their worry outruns their breath. She meant protect your heart. She meant you cannot keep bleeding on the same edges forever and then wonder why you feel lightheaded when the morning comes. If you've ever looked at the people you love and thought, we are a miracle, we almost ruined, then you already understand the place I'm speaking from. One message from Jimin can make a gray day feel gold. One silence can make the night feel like it has no window. One joke from Taehyung can make my chest open like a door in spring. One misunderstanding can slam it shut with the noise that wakes the neighbors. We have been everything to each other. Brothers, teammates, opposites that fit, echoes that ring for hours. And still, there are weeks when the timing falls apart, like a rhythm you can't find again, no matter how you count. I didn't answer my mother. I watched the soup cool and thought about the practice room where the air smells like dust and effort, where mirrors hold the versions of us that try to move 100 times until it felt like breathing. I thought about the nights when the only thing louder than the crowd was the quiet in the van after a misunderstanding that started as a joke and ended like a bruise. I thought about the bright places in my memory where Jimin laughed without looking at the camera, where Taehyung sang with his eyes closed as if the room was big enough to hold a sky of his own. And I thought about the recent weeks, when something in the pattern of our days had shifted by a millimeter, so small you could miss it, so precise you could measure it in the way a voice didn't answer, in the way a schedule changed without explanation. I'm not here to tell you who was wrong, because I have been wrong in ways that don't look like wrongness until you replay the scene and realize your smallest choice pulled a thread you didn't see. I'm here to tell you what I noticed when I let myself look. Managers moving dinner times forward, as if they were trying to keep certain people from crossing at the same door. Brand emails asking for separate content pieces where they used to ask for one. Staff placing chairs at rehearsals with a little extra space between names that used to sit side by side. Tiny choices, paper cuts, harmless if you only see one, scary if you see 20. Inside the group, we feel each other the way you feel, the gravity of a planet you live on, even when you're not thinking about it. Taehyung sends a message that doesn't say much on the surface, but buried inside is the same quiet math he uses to make a joke land at the exact right second. He knows the rhythm has been off, and he's inventing a beat to hold us steady. Jungkook speaks in 10 words that weigh more than most speeches. Don't answer quickly. Breathe and then reply. Hoseok sends sunshine like medicine, pretending it's about something else, the way a friend hands you water and calls it just because, when he knows your mouth is dry. Hyung asks how the sky looked today in a city I'm not in, and somehow I feel less far away from myself. And me? I run at night until my legs are rubber and the stitch settles into a rhythm I can trust. I sing into a phone that records without judging, then delete the files because I don't want to hear how my voice changes when I say certain names. I began to notice Jimin moving like a cautious dancer across a floor he used to fly over. He would type, erase, type, leave the text unsent, as if the words felt heavier than his hands could hold. Taehyung would drop a voice note that started with laughter and ended with a sigh like a door he didn't close all the way. They weren't fighting on camera. That's not how most fractures work. They happen in the small places, the spaces that don't trend, the spaces where you are just a person standing in a kitchen with a phone you cannot make ring. There was a night, if you were watching closely, you saw nothing, which is exactly why I'm telling you. A rehearsal ended early for reasons that sounded normal when you said them fast. We're good here. Let's give everyone rest. We'll pick up in the morning. But I watched how the room emptied. I watched who looked at the floor and who looked at the door and who looked at me and then away. I watched a staff member carry a clipboard like a shield. I watched the way a technician unplugged a mic with a care you only use when you don't want to make noise. Sometimes I think the most dangerous thing in a team is not conflict, but the habit of politeness you use to avoid it. We are good at giving each other room. Sometimes we forget that space isn't always kindness. Sometimes it's a way to let the doubt multiply like vines while you look in the other direction. When my mother said what she said, I wanted to argue. I wanted to say that loyalty is not a faucet you turn off and on to control the flood. I wanted to say that you don't forget people who know your voice from the throat, not the radio. But I also understood her fear. The way love can become a cliff you run toward with your eyes open. The way misunderstanding can make the longest history feel suddenly fragile, like glass you've been sure was unbreakable until you hear the crack. I didn't take her advice. Not exactly. I didn't forget. I did something harder. I decided to keep looking, to keep noticing, to let the truth come into the room and sit at the table, even if it made the soup go cold. I traced the shift through our days and tried to find the thread that would let me pull us back to center. I checked my own heart first. It's an unfair rule of life that your worst stories often begin with the right reasons. I wanted us to be okay. In the quiet, I admitted something I didn't want to say out loud. Sometimes I push too hard when I'm scared that distance is widening. Sometimes I become intensity when what the room needs is air. On a rain-soft evening, I stood outside a studio long after everyone left. The neon in the alley hummed. The puddles made cheap mirrors out of bad light. I listened to a memo from Jimin that was nothing more than a melody hummed under his breath. It sounded like a bridge trying to remember it was built to connect two sides, not become another river. I saved it. Then I deleted it. Then I saved it again because hope is stubborn even when the facts whisper otherwise. Later, Taehyung sent a photo of a sky. No words, just the color of an hour that doesn't last long and knows it. I stared at it and thought about how every friendship is a weather system you learn by standing in it through a few storms. You might be waiting for the big reveal, for a backstage scene with voices raised and doors slammed, but life doesn't always honor the rules of the dramas we watch to teach us about life. What I have to offer you tonight isn't an explosion. It's a map of small tremors that, taken together, startled me more than any earthquake. A stylist booking 2 fitting rooms when one used to be enough. A manager briefing me on press questions that included, for the first time, a line about steering away from personal topics. A choreographer rearranging an ending so that bodies who used to land shoulder to shoulder now finish a step with half a breath of air between them. That night at my mother's house, after the soup cooled, I washed the dishes. Because doing small things well is a way to remember you're still here, still useful, still capable of order when the rest feels like weather. She dried the bowls. We didn't speak. At the end, she touched my arm and said, "You know what I mean." And I nodded because I did. She was trying to protect the part of me that believes love can always translate itself if you give it enough time. Mothers protect that part because they know what it costs to grow it. If you're older, if you've watched your own circle stretch and shrink with the seasons, you already know that no bond survives by nostalgia alone. It needs maintenance, like an instrument, like breathing exercises, like the way we warm up before we ask our bodies to do something difficult. If you're younger, if you're looking at us the way I used to look at the artists I loved and thinking they're bulletproof, then let me correct that. We are not bulletproof. We are stitched. We are repaired. We are constantly learning which thread to pull and which to leave alone. So what did I do with the sentence my mother gave me? I carried it like a stone in my pocket, and I let it teach me the weight of things. I didn't cut off Jimin. I didn't avoid Taehyung. I looked for the right hour, the right air, the right way to ask the questions that hurt to speak. I drafted messages at 2 a.m. and I deleted them because I didn't want the blue light to tell my heart what to feel. I waited until morning when words are less dramatic and more honest. I wrote, Hyung, I miss the way we didn't think about how to be okay because we already were. I don't want to step on your air. Tell me where to stand. I wrote, Tae, that sky you sent, was that a peace offering or a confession or both? If I've been too much, I'll be less without being gone. I did not send either message that day. I went to rehearsal, I listened, I watched. Hoseo Kyung clapped on 2 and 4 like he was trying to summon the spirit of an easy afternoon. Namjoon Hyung counted us in and let the last number hang in the air a fraction longer than usual, as if leaving room for one of us to say something if we needed to. Yoongi Hyung narrowed his eyes the way he does when he's balancing the chemistry of a track in his head, and I knew he wasn't just hearing the beat. There is a moment in every performance when the lighting tech breathes with the stage, when the cue is a feeling more than a clock. I decided to treat my brothers that way, not as problems to solve, as light to follow. That day, I moved closer when laughter arrived, and stepped back when the room felt like it needed an unobstructed view to its own thoughts. I didn't solve anything dramatic. I didn't announce a truce that could trend. I just let the small good things accumulate. A shared water bottle, a nod that meant I saw that, an apology disguised as a joke that both of us agreed to take as the more serious thing it really was. And every night, I returned to my mother's sentence and asked it to show me what it was really trying to say. Sometimes it meant rest. Sometimes it meant stop replaying the worst version of a moment as if that's the only cut that matters. Sometimes it meant be courageous enough to stop knocking on a door that's locked for a reason and wait outside with patience and a jacket. And sometimes it meant exactly what it said. Let go of the story you keep telling yourself about how this has to look, because growing up is accepting that love changes shape and still counts as love. I won't pretend I didn't break a little. I won't pretend there weren't days when every song felt like a question with no chorus. But there was a morning, the kind that sneaks up on you by simply not being night anymore, when a message finally arrived. Not long, not dramatic, just enough. Jimin wrote, "Can we talk without trying to win?" Taehyung wrote minutes later, "I don't want to be right. I want to be us." You might think I'm romanticizing. I'm not. I'm remembering. The difference is everything. We met in a quiet room that smelled like coffee, and the worry you get when people who can read your face are about to look directly at it. No cameras, no set list, just 3 people who have been everything for each other and forgot for a second how to show it. We said the truth things slowly because truth can bruise when it's rushed. We did not solve the universe. We didn't have to. We named the small patterns that had been hurting us late, replies that meant nothing but felt like everything, jokes that disguised fear and then grew teeth, the way success can build walls that look like windows if you're not paying attention. We made agreements that won't make headlines. Reply when you can, and if you can't, say you can't. When you need space, name it without making the other person guess. If you feel the old jealousy tapping like a persistent rain, say so before it floods the room. We promise to practice gratitude out loud, not just silently when the lights go down. After I walked back into daylight that looked ordinary, which is how, a miracle has done its job. The city was still loud, My phone still buzzed. The schedule still demanded more than one person should give. But inside, the weather changed. The map didn't become easy. It became honest. There's a difference between we don't fight and we know how to find each other when we get lost. I used to think the first was the goal. I know better now. If you're listening from a small room after a long day, if you're holding a message you don't know how to send, if your own mother has ever said something that sounded like protection and felt like a dare, this is for you. You don't have to forget the people who live in your bones. You might need to release the version of them that makes you bleed. You might need to forgive yourself for not being the mind reader you once tried to be. And you might need to sit at a kitchen table with soup going cold and let the air teach you how to breathe again. I am still learning. Tomorrow I might fail at everything I said tonight and have to begin again, which is embarrassing and human and fine. I am grateful for every Hyung who catches me before I fall, for every moment when a laugh breaks tension like light through a heavy curtain, for every message that doesn't say much and somehow says exactly what I needed. I am grateful for my mother's sentence, which didn't end us. It redirected me toward the kind of love that is brave enough to look, careful enough to listen, and strong enough to stay. And if you're wondering where the others are in this story, Seokjin cracking a line that saves the day without asking for credit, Yoongi choosing a word like a surgeon chooses a blade, Hoseok lifting the ceiling with one clap and a grin, Namjoon tilting the compass north with a question that sounds like weather but means home. They're here. They've always been here. The family we built can bend without breaking if we remember that its bones are made of promises we keep in the small hours, when no one is watching, when the only applause is the quiet that arrives after someone says, "I'm sorry," and someone else says, "I know." The morning after that quiet room, I woke before my alarm and lay still, listening to the apartment settle around me, the city testing its voice beneath the windows. There's a tone the world takes when a conversation has moved something inside you, not a triumph, not a defeat, more like a hinge that no longer squeaks. I made coffee and watched the dark turn thin at the edges, thinking about how promises feel light when you first say them and heavy when you carry them through a day that doesn't cooperate. I texted my mother a photo of the mug and the view. She sent back a heart and nothing else. The blessing she knows how to give without asking for a report. Rehearsal was at 10, but I went early just to be in the room while it was still half asleep. The mirrors held yesterday like they always do. And for a second, I let myself look at the versions of us that had stumbled, recovered, joked, avoided, tried again. I stretched to the count of my own breath and felt the simple mercy of muscles answering when called. When the door clicked, I didn't turn right away. The air changes when it becomes plural. Even silence has more density. Jimin set his bag down with a gentleness that meant he hadn't slept, or had and wished he hadn't. Taehyung's footsteps made a melody out of habit before words could catch up. We greeted each other normally, which is to say, we greeted each other like people who know the cost of pretending nothing needs attention. Hoseok burst in a few minutes later like sunlight that misread the forecast and came anyway. Clapping once, twice, a rhythm that steadied the floor. "Let's wake the mirrors," he said. And it worked. The room rose to meet us. Namjoon arrived with the look he gets when he has 3 thoughts and is willing to trade 2 of them for whatever the moment needs. Yoongi slipped past with headphones around his neck, eyes already balancing invisible scales. Seokjin messaged that he'd swing by after an appointment. Even his absence has a shape that makes the rest of us stand straighter. We started slow. No one said this out loud, but we were testing whether the agreements we made in that coffee-scented room could survive choreography and fatigue, and the small misunderstandings that ride in on the backs of big ones. The first run wasn't clean. It didn't need to be. What mattered was that when a count went sideways, nobody sharpened. We softened instead, widened the measure, so the mistake had a place to land without breaking anything. During a water break, I stood near the window where the light comes in at an angle that forgives. Jimin drifted over, shoulder barely touching the frame beside mine. the safe distance we had promised to name when we needed it. That message yesterday, he said, voice low. I meant every word. He looked at the floor and then at me, and I could see the careful bravery it takes to repeat a truth without the adrenaline that first carried it. I don't want to try to win either, I said. I want to try to listen before I guess. Between us, a quiet agreement set down roots. When we went again, the shape of the dance changed in a way you probably wouldn't catch unless you've lived inside it. The last 8 was always ours, a signature that fit like a memory. Lately, it had felt like a question mark. This time, we reached the landing, and I left half an inch of air where my shoulder used to meet his, not as a retreat, but as an invitation. He read it instantly and moved into it on the next pass, a reply that didn't require our mouths. Sometimes, repair is a choreography long before it becomes a conversation. Taehyung watched all of this with that painter's patience he keeps hidden under mischief, then wandered over to the speaker and cued a track that wasn't on the schedule, an old warm thing we used to loop when time had edges we could see. For calibration, he said, half smile, trying to be casual and failing in the most beautiful way. The room changed temperature. We didn't rehearse for a minute. We remembered. Hoseok whooped on instinct. Namjoon laughed in that way that says he's trying not to and losing. Yoongi's mouth tilted, which is his version of fireworks. We move, not to prove anything, to remember what our bodies know when our brains are too loud. And there, in that unplanned minute, I felt the hinge swing again smoother, easier, and a thought arrived so simply I was almost embarrassed I'd been fighting it. We are allowed to update the shape of how we belong to each other without calling it a failure. The original blueprint doesn't get jealous when the house we build needs another window. Later, Seokjin showed up with a bag of tangerines and a story that involved 3 strangers, a broken elevator, and a punchline. I won't repeat because it belongs to that room. He peeled one and handed segments around like communion. Vitamins for terrible decisions, he announced, which made Jimin laugh from the stomach, the sound I had been missing without realizing it. Yoongi, still half in headphones, looked at me and then at the 2 of them and said, mostly to himself, good. Keep it boring, which in his language means keep it sustainable. We ended early but stayed late, the rare combination that only happens when time behaves. As staff packed cables and notes, Namjoon asked if anyone wanted to walk. No plan, no cameras, just sidewalks, and the kind of talk that knows the value of detours. We went. 3 blocks of nothing special, a convenience store for bottled tea, and the kind of chips that taste like a dare. A crosswalk that refused to change and made us stand together long enough for the city to braid us back into itself. Taehyung pointed at a dog whose tail had more confidence than most people. Jimin told a tiny story about a tourist who bowed to a mannequin and apologized. I watched their faces and kept doing the math my mother taught me without instructions. How much distance is care? How much closeness is pressure? When to be noise? When to be gravity? That night, back home, I opened the folder where I keep things that are not songs yet. Titles that are more feeling than language. Lines that arrived in gyms and cars and hallways and refused to leave. I wrote 1 sentence and didn't delete it. If we can't go back to how it was, let's go forward to how it should be. I didn't send it to anyone. I sang it once into the phone, softly, like I was trying not to wake a sleeping house. The next day complicated everything, as days are hired to do. A call sheet changed an hour before call. An interview that was supposed to be safe turned toward personal waters, and we all had to lean on the agreement we'd made about steering clear when questions came shaped like bait. A producer suggested splitting us for a segment for variety, the kind of harmless angle that can turn into shards if you don't notice the outlines. I watched Jimin blink and choose the smile that says no without saying it. I watched Taehyung stand a half step closer as if to say, I won't let you answer alone. The moment passed. The room kept moving. But the ledger inside me marked a line under the column labeled, We Are Learning. In the evening, I called my mother before she could call me. I told her about nothing important until the conversation had the bravery to hold something that was. I didn't forget, I said. I changed what remembering means. She was quiet long enough for me to worry I'd said it badly, then breathed out a small yes that wrapped the sentence in approval. Good, she said. Forgetting is a trick, mending is a craft. I wrote that down because I don't want to live a life where wisdom only happens once. There's a habit I'm trying to grow. When I feel the old panic pulling on the thread of my patience, I stop and name one scene from the past that proves we know how to cross a hard bridge. A backstage corridor where Hosik held my shoulders and reset the angle of my breath. A studio couch where Namjoon said, use shorter sentences when you're tired. They don't break as easily. A narrow stair where Seokjin waited for me to finish being angry at gravity before making me laugh. A kitchen in a rented place, late, where Yoongi offered silence like a room with the lights exactly right. A street at dawn where Taehyung and Jimin argued about the color of the sky and were both right in ways that made the morning bigger. People ask what love looks like when a team has been through this many seasons. It looks like tangerines and old tracks and a text that says arrived and another that says same. It looks like leaving air where a shoulder used to be and trusting that air to become invitation instead of distant. It looks like telling the truth slowly enough that it doesn't bruise, quickly enough that it doesn't rot. It looks like the courage to be ordinary on days when your job asks you to be legend. I don't know who needed to hear this tonight, but if you're standing in a room that holds an old echo and a new hope at the same time, you are not failing. You are in rehearsal for the life you promised yourself when you were too young to know how complex keeping promises would be. Keep the agreements that don't trend. Return to the room early. Let the mirrors wake gently. And when a song you love that isn't on the schedule walks in with its shoes off, make room. That's where repair begins, in the unplanned minutes. Inside the laughter that remembers beneath the work that teaches your bones to be brave again. The week bent in the middle like a page someone dog-eared, and I could feel the crease every time I tried to smooth it flat. A rumor started where rumors always begin, in that foggy place between a clipped sentence and a camera angled a little too low, and by noon it had a name, a theory, an army. None of it was new, only the timing hurt. We had just learned how to breathe near each other again without checking the room for witnesses. And suddenly the air was crowded with strangers deciding what our faces meant. I kept my phone face down and failed at pretending that made me braver. The screen vibrated like a pulse I couldn't ignore. When I finally looked, there it was. A short, bright clip from rehearsal, cut in that merciless way that takes one neutral second and carves a story into it. My shoulder turning away from Jimin as he reached for a water bottle, Taehyung's eyes following the motion like a question, a caption that said more than the scene could hold. I watched it twice, then I watched the original session, the long one, where the moment lived in context and meant nothing except that the cap was stubborn and we were tired. I closed both videos and sat with the strange truth that in our world the facts can be honest and still lose the argument. We gathered in the small studio we use when we don't want to perform being a group. We want to be one. The couch sighed under too many elbows. The table collected the nervous habits of 7 people. Aligned bottles, twisted caps, crumbs, tandem size. Namjoon placed his phone screen down too, a peace offering to the part of me that wanted to throw mine into a river. Yoongi had that far look that means he's stitching a net out of silence and will throw it when we start to fall. Hosok pointed at the speaker, then at us. The gentlest check your volume I've ever seen. Seokjin peeled another tangerine, because apparently grace can be a citrus ritual. Jimin stared at a seam in the rug like it could tell him how to be a person in a room that knows him too well. Taehyung spun a ring slowly, the kind of motion that keeps the storm from touching the ground. I'm not angry about the clip, I said, and my voice surprised me by being true. I'm angry about how quickly I believed it might be a problem. Saying it out loud took the teeth out of it. Jimin's mouth twitched an almost smile. The kind that happens when you recognize a familiar enemy and remember you've learned its move. I should have called you before I scrolled, he said, eyes still on the rug. Then up, then straight at me. I let strangers do the math and decided they were better at it than us. The room loosened. Taehyung leaned back like the ceiling had risen a few inches. Hoseok exhaled a laugh that didn't deny anything and didn't dramatize it either. Okay, Namjoon said, like a conductor bringing strings in on a softer bar. Then the rule is, we check the long version before we believe the short one. Truth is rarely loud. It arrived next as a small tremor. Jimin flexed his fingers and winced he jammed them earlier on a landing we've done 1,000 times. It wasn't serious, but the timing made his face do that thing it does when he's 2 decisions away from pushing through and calling it resilience. I reached for the ice pack before he could argue with the air. I wrapped his hand too carefully, too slowly, on purpose, so care could be an action and not a speech. You always make it too tight, he complained, the theatrical kind of complaint that gives a room a script it can follow back to normal. I always fix it when you pretend you don't like it, I answered. The line we wrote years ago and still means stay. Later in the booth, the lights low enough to make the day forget itself, Yoongi hit play on a loop that had the friendly patience of a heartbeat. He doesn't tell you what to sing. He builds a room where the truth can overhear itself and decide to step closer. One take, he said, which means take your time. I stood in front of the mic with the sentence I'd written the night before, ricocheting around my ribs. If we can't go back to how it was, let's go forward to how it should be. I didn't sing it exactly. I let the shape of it land on a melody Jimin had hummed in a memo months ago, the bridge that didn't know it was a bridge yet. Taehyung joined from the couch. Not words at first, just that warm, round sound he makes when he's testing the edge of a horizon. We built a small thing that knew it was unfinished and was proud anyway. Yoongi didn't say nice. He just moved a fader half a breath and nodded, which is the producer's version of don't be afraid, it's working. The day made new trouble because that's the contract. A magazine called to reshoot a spread because the mood has evolved. We laughed. Everything is a poet when they want another fee. The reschedule meant my mother's dinner moved, which meant her question moved. Are you remembering or are you rehearsing your fear? I told her both, then told her about the clip, about the meeting, about the song that wasn't a song yet. Good, she said, in that valley where approval and caution hold hands. Make something out of the noise. Noise hates being useful. In the evening, we tried to walk again, the same streets, as if we could teach the city to expect our better selves. The weather had changed, all corners and wind. Jimin held his ice bandage like a joke he wasn't willing to make yet. Taehyung wore a cap low, anonymity styled as permission. A fan spotted us from a kind distance and did the kindest thing. Nothing dramatic. Just a nod that translated as, I see you, not your shadows. We nodded back. Sometimes the entire human experiment is contained in whether 2 strangers choose theater or mercy. Back at the dorm, the elevator paused between floors like it needed to decide who we were going to be when the doors opened. I keep thinking, Jimin said into the pause, that I owe the internet an explanation. Then I remember I owe my friends a conversation. The simplicity of it made me close my eyes for half a second to let the sentence set. We are learning, Taehyung added, to disappoint the wrong audience. The elevator resumed as if it had been waiting for that line. Night returned with its usual bag of tricks. Appetite at the wrong hour, a message half written, the itch to fix the world with a paragraph. I put the phone on the window ledge and listened to the city argue with itself until it got sleepy. I thought about the choreography of care and where it lives when the room is empty. It lives, I think, in the choices you make when no one knows you made them. In deciding to believe the long version of a friend when the short version wins more applause. In writing your name beneath the word patience and meaning it. In asking yourself, before you send the thing that feels brave at 2 a.m., whether morning might make a better author. At some dishonest hour, the fire alarm chirped its low battery loneliness and chaos tried to borrow the moment. I laughed in the dark because there is always a test, even when it's tiny and stupid and loud. I changed the battery and climbed back into a bed that felt like a raft. Sleep didn't arrive immediately, but something gentler did, a willingness to wait for it without negotiating terms. I counted breaths like I used to count beats when the nerves were too big and the stage was too close. Somewhere around 40, my mind wandered to the old practice room where Hoseok taught me to trust the floor, to drop into it instead of hovering above it as if gravity were optional. Let the floor hold you, he'd said. Don't argue with physics. I tried the thought on my chest, the way you test a hat in a mirror. It fit. Morning took the edge off the rumor, as mornings do. The clip kept spinning for people who like motion more than truth. But inside our little weather system, the winds calmed. We didn't resolve anything that requires a headline. We didn't promise never to be fragile again. We chose smaller bravery. To keep the reshoot, to keep the walk, to keep the song that isn't finished yet, to keep the agreements that never make it to captions. When we met at the studio door, there was no speech. Just a series of micro yeses, eye contact for half a second longer than needed, a shoulder that didn't flinch, a joke that didn't hide a knife, a hand to the glass of the door to hold it for the next person. If you're listening and waiting for the perfect line that fixes the week, I don't have it. What I have is a practice. We will be misunderstood by people who have never shared a locker room silence after the toughest take of your life. We will be loved by people who can read the simple courage it takes to show up after a bruise. We will keep making a map that is not to scale and still gets us home. And when the world cuts a second out of the long version and tries to sell it as the whole story, we will look at each other and remember the room, the couch, the ice pack, the loop, the ring, the citrus, the elevator that waited for our better word. We will remember who we were before the caption and who we intend to be after it. Then we will press play and count in together, not because the beat is perfect, but because it's ours. The calendar pretended to be neutral, but the day had edges. A live recording, 3 interviews threaded between rehearsal and the stage. A brand meeting built like a maze with yes divided by no doors. I woke with that quiet dread that looks like calm on the surface and only reveals itself in how carefully you butter toast. My mother texted a photo of her morning garden, the same 2 roses that refused to bloom at the same time, and wrote, "They don't compete, they take turns." I stared at the screen longer than the wisdom required. Then I put the phone down and tried to let the message rearrange the furniture inside my chest. At the studio, the air was electric with logistics. Someone's headset crackled. Someone's clipboard looked like it might sprout wings. We ran the set twice, then once more for luck that isn't really luck. I could feel the new vowels breathing in the room. Check the long version before trusting the short. Leave air that can become invitation. Disappoint the wrong audience with grace. They're not slogans you write on a wall. They're muscles. They fatigue. You train them anyway. In the green room, a stylist adjusted my collar and made a face that meant be careful. The cameras want more than clothes today. I nodded. Jimin sat across from me, rolling his jammed fingers over a warm pack, the swelling almost gone, but still opinionated. Taehyung tried on 3 hats and chose none, his hair doing that thing where it looks like it woke up understanding the brief. "We'll do the thing," he said, vague on purpose. Jimin replied with a non-committal hum that we both understood as yes. The thing was simple. When a question arrives, shaped like a trap, we widen it until it becomes a harmless road. On stage, the lights rose slow, like a curtain that respects nerves. The host's smile had angles, friendly enough to pass customs, sharp enough to cut if provoked. He started soft, asked about the track, the choreography, the work. The audience laughed where audiences laugh. Then he leaned in, the way people do when they're about to call gossip, concerned. He mentioned the clip. He asked whether our dynamic had changed. He used the word rift, with the kind of confidence that comes from reading it too many times in a meeting where no one knew us. I felt the old reaction load into my muscles, the one that wants to correct, defend, fix. Then I saw Jimin's eyes flick sideways and return, a tiny orbit that meant he was anchoring. I heard the lift in Taehyung's breath, ready to turn a question into a broader sky. "We're evolving," I said, which is true even when everything is fine. We've been together long enough to know change isn't the enemy. Silence is, Jimin added. We don't audition for rumors anymore. We rehearse for each other. Taehyung smiled like he'd been handed a guitar. If you play only your first hit forever, the song becomes a cage. The host blinked, recalibrated, retreated. The audience did that soft murmur. That means they felt it, even if they couldn't summarize it. The segment moved on. I watched the trap turn into a hallway and felt something uncoil. Backstage, the producer with the careful politeness thanked us for keeping it classy. I swallowed a laugh that didn't fit the room and let gratitude answer instead. In the narrow corridor that leads to the dressing rooms, Namjoon met us with that calm he carries like a portable climate. That was sturdy, he said, which is the highest compliment in our language. Hoseo clapped once in the open stairwell because echo makes joy official. Yoongi checked the schedule like a man counting the beats until the next chorus and then looked up long enough to say, food in 10. Seokjin appeared with paper cups of something warm and sweet, and the day briefly forgot it had teeth. Between commitments, we had a brand meeting on a high floor where the city looks honest. The deck opened with the usual slides. Heritage, synergy, buzzwords, dressed as insights. Then came the proposal. 2 solo looks for contrast and a duo for fan service, no trio shot for focus. There it was again, the harmless angle that can shard if you don't name it. The room waited for our reaction, the way a dog tilts its head to understand your tone. I could feel Taehyung's posture go casual in the way that means alert. Jimin tapped his thumb against his palm, a Morse code he doesn't know he's sending. I spoke slowly so the sentence could build a room. Contrast is meaningful when it illuminates the bridge, not when it removes it, I said. 3 or none. The brand lead blinked like sunlight, surprised him. He looked at the budget like it might argue it didn't. 3, he said. A tiny victory. Nobody outside this floor will ever applaud, the kind that keeps your bones aligned. Later, the system made another attempt to test us. A source close to the group whispered to a blog that we'd asked to be split for the shoot. The post ran fast and loud. My phone lit up with the same old arguments wearing new clothes. I put it face down again and remembered my mother's roses. Don't compete. Take turns. I asked Jimin if he wanted to be the one to answer or the one to decline to answer. Both acceptable, both brave. He chose decline. Taehyung posted a photo of the 3 of us from 2 years ago, hair different, faces identical in the places that matter with no caption, because sometimes the long version fits into a square if you let it breathe. The comments tried to pick a fight with a memory. The memory didn't answer. It didn't need to. In the studio that evening, we returned to the small song Yoongi had been shepherding into existence. The loop felt a shade warmer, like a room the sun had found. Try the line again, he said, nodding at me without looking. All trust, no ceremony. I sang the sentence the way I wrote it less, like an anthem, more like a promise you whisper to a mirror so you can't accuse yourself of forgetting it later. Jimin came in on the back half with a harmony that healed the measure where I'd left air. Taehyung floated a low thread underneath, the kind that makes a chorus feel like a place you recognize even if you've never visited. Hoseok snapped on 2 and 4, a spine disguised as fun. Namjoon changed one preposition and fixed the geometry. Seokjin offered a top note with the softness of someone handing you a blanket without making you admit you're cold. For a moment, the world outside the glass ceased to exist. The internet could have combusted and we would have kept the tape. After we ate late in the small kitchen where the kettle speaks fluent exhaustion. Someone put honey in the tea. Someone else opened a bag of something crunchy and regrettable. We stood, leaning, a loose constellation of elbows and hip bones. Yoongi sat on the counter like a cat that pays rent. He asked nothing and noticed everything. Jimin flexed his hand and found less pain waiting. Taehyung narrated the lives of the strangers we could see in the windows across the alley like they were a show we'd been following for years. That one is trying to keep a plant alive with pure optimism, he said. That one keeps playing track 3 of something we'll never hear. I listened and felt the relief that comes when the day's story stops being about you. On the way home, the car took the long route by accident and solved a problem I didn't know how to name. We passed a park where a group of kids were teaching each other dribble moves under a light that wasn't quite bright enough. They shouted each other's names like punchlines. No cameras, no captions, just joy working a double shift. A part of me I sometimes forget came back online. The city kept its promises. The same vendor at the corner, the same dog with the arrogant tail, the same crosswalk that thinks it's a philosopher. At a red light, my mother's text arrived, delayed by the strange currents that carry messages. Don't forget to eat. Don't forget to breathe. Don't forget that forgetting isn't the assignment. At home, I took a shower that felt like permission and scrolled. Not at all. A tiny rebellion, I hope, becomes a habit. I opened the folder of not yet songs and renamed the file we'd started, not with a title and not with a date, but with a question. How it should be. I listened once to the raw bounce Yoongi sent, no polish, all heart, and let the rough edges do what they do best. Remind me that progress sounds messy before it sounds inevitable. Sleep negotiated with me for a while and then agreed to terms. In that soft hallway between awake and gone, a scene came back with the clarity dreams reserved for things you can't ignore. The rehearsal room without mirrors. Just the floor, the speakers, and us. We ran the ending. I left the space. Jimin stepped into it. Taehyung's laugh landed where it always does. Right on the beat, where relief turns into rhythm. Nothing extraordinary happened, which is exactly what I want. Stability that chooses you back. A friendship that learns to be ordinary without shrinking. A team that updates its vows without filing them as PR. If you're here tonight because you were afraid the rumor was going to be the real story, let me give you a boring miracle. We made tea, we said no to a deck, we sang a line until it remembered what it wanted. We told a trap to widen or be lonely. We walked, we answered the right audience. We chose to be sturdy. Sometimes the hinge doesn't squeak because the door didn't move. Sometimes it's quiet because someone oiled it when no one was watching. I want a life built out of those small, unglamorous choices. The ones that don't trend, don't explain themselves, don't chase applause, and somehow keep the room together when the day leans against it with all its weight. The day we'd set aside to finish the bridge began with a forecast that refused to commit sun, then cloud, then a fine mistake of rain that didn't bother with umbrellas. It felt like the kind of weather that can't choose a genre. I took it as a warning and packed 2 jackets. Management had slipped a small pop-up showcase into the afternoon, 3 songs. Limited audience, cameras invited but told to behave. Good energy check, someone said, which is the industry's way of asking your heart if it still remembers how to lift without being asked twice. The room was a converted warehouse with beams that remembered heavier work. Soundcheck went the way soundchecks go when everyone is slightly superstitious. We ran the ending twice, then one more time because pretending not to be superstitious doesn't fool the part of you that is. Jimin's hand was almost fully itself again. He flexed it like someone reacquainting with a friend who'd been away on an inconvenient trip. Taehyung tuned his voice, the way he tunes cameras, angles first, then feeling, then a mischievous flourish that keeps nerves from getting ideas. Hoseok counted us off and added an extra clap at the end for luck disguised as style. Namjoon rephrased the line on the spot and snapped the song into a shape that felt inevitable. Yoongi, arms folded, eyes unfocused, listened for the problem that hadn't announced itself yet. Seokjin showed up with a bag of warm fish cakes and a grin that understood everything without filing a report. Right before doors, my phone lit with a message from my mother, 3 dots. Then a photo of the same roses, finally blooming at once. They're stubborn, she wrote. Must be hereditary. I laughed in my chest and typed back a picture of my shoes in the scuffed floor with 2 words. We, too. She hearted it, the kind of tiny exchange that doesn't fix anything and fixes everything. The set began easy, all breath and muscle memory. The audience was the generous kind present without being hungry. Loud in all the right ways, quiet in the ways that count. Then, on the third song, the one that isn't a song yet, the one living under the working question, how it should be, the power stuttered. Not a drama movie blackout, more like a long blink from an eye that wasn't sure it wanted to stay open. The track faltered, the lights hiccuped. The room took that single collective breath people take right before they decide whether to panic. I don't know why my hand moved first, only that it did. I lifted the mic and sang the opening line without the safety of the loop, bare and a little raw, the way we'd recorded it when the only instrument was honesty. For a half second, it was only my voice and the sound of an audience remembering it had a heartbeat. Then Jimin stepped in. No click, no count. The harmony he'd been saving arriving like a hand on my shoulder that says, I'm here, keep walking. Taehyung slipped underneath with that warm line he keeps for moments that need a floor. Phones went up, not to record first, but to light the room, the kindest constellation. Hoseok found 2 and 4 with his palms. Human metronome, joy doubling as back. Namjoon reshaped a lyric mid-phrase so it fit the acoustic spine. Yoongi, smiling like a secret, nodded at the house engineer to kill the dying track completely. Seokjin stepped to the edge of the stage and, with a small wave, asked the audience to sing the easiest part with us. They did. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. It was a long version, singing over the short one. When the power decided to be brave again, the room chose to ignore it. We finished the take as it began. No grid, just faith. Backstage, we laughed the way people do after the only kind of miracle they believe in. The kind they built with unglamorous instincts. A staffer apologized to Yoongi like he'd offended a delicate god. Yoongi shook his head. Keep that in the bounce, he said. Don't clean it. The engineer blinked, then grinned. You got it. Of course the clip went out. Not the long one, at first. The short one with the lights dying and our faces in half shadow, slices of sound. The captions did what captions do, but for once, they had trouble deciding what story to assign us. Chaos didn't stick. Voice cracks couldn't compete with 100 strangers harmonizing a line they didn't know yet. And then someone posted a longer cut. The phones held steady. The room turning into a choir. The moment Jimin's harmony slipped into my line like we'd planned it, and the second Taehyung's low note turned a shaky melody into a place you could stand. The comments grew quieter and wider. A few simply wrote, I was there, as if that was the argument. We didn't linger. There was studio time on the calendar and the bridge wasn't going to write itself. On the drive, the city looked tired in that pretty way. Cities get after they've done their job of being complicated all day. I replayed the unamplified moment in my head and felt a click inside. Not dramatic, just true. Sometimes the version with less power carries more current. At the studio, Yoongi cued the rough from the room and let the messy air live in the speakers. We keep the risk, he said. That's where the spine is. Namjoon circled one pronoun and changed the map. Jimin traced a counter melody that threaded through the second half like an arm returning to his sleeve at trust. Taehyung suggested dropping instruments at the bridge entirely, 3 voices, then the beat landing like a promise you intend to keep even when no one's watching. Hoseok tried a clap that sounded like a smile. Seokjin tilted his head, listened once more, then lifted a gentle top note you could mistake for light. We recorded. Not the final, the don't lose this version. Midnight tried to borrow the room, as it does. A notification flashed across a monitor. Someone forgot to mute another blog dressing a rumor in new adjectives. No one reached for their phone. We were busy. Work is an effective exorcism when the ghosts are bored. After the take, we sat on the floor like trainees, backs against the wall, sweat cooling in the quick draft breeze that comes under studio doors. The conversation was light tour food disasters, a hat that defeated Taehyung in a high-end store, the way Hoseok can locate joy in a vending machine with 3 options. Beneath it, the quieter talk continued. How much space is care? How much closeness is pressure? When to answer, when to delete. On the way out, the corridor was a wind tunnel of old posters and new plans. A staffer asked for a quote for the pop-up disaster that wasn't I said, "We practiced being a band." He laughed, waited for the real one, realized that was it, wrote it down anyway. In the parking lot, Seokjin handed out hot packs like merit badges. "For surviving electricity," he said. Jimin tucked one into his sleeve and bumped my shoulder with the kind of contact we've relearned. No performance, no apology, something simpler. Taehyung lifted his phone and took a photo of our shadows on the asphalt. "Proof of concept," he joked. "We exist even when the main lights cut." At home, I showered with the door cracked to let the mirror decide not to fog. I poured tea and didn't drink it until it was lukewarm, a habit my mother calls evidence of thinking. I saved the live rough to my folder and renamed it again. A little braver. How it should be keep the room. I wrote a line in the notes app I pretend isn't a diary. A blackout taught us where the power is. I didn't add a period. Some sentences are better left open, in case tomorrow has an edit worth keeping. Sleep found me with a memory on its tongue. The audience's first note, tentative, then together. Jimin's harmony landing like a promise he'd been carrying long enough to know its weight. Taehyung's low thread closing the gap. Hoseok's clap lifting the floor. Namjoon's tiny word pivot altering the weather. Yoongi's finger over the fader refusing to erase the human noise. Seokjin's laugh down the hall convincing the night it could relax. If you've ever wondered what holds a team when the lights flicker, it isn't bravery with the spotlight. It's muscle memory of care. It's a boring miracle of people who choose in the dark to keep singing the long version until the room remembers the chorus. The morning after the warehouse felt like a room that remembered laughter, a warmth in the corners, a patience in the light. I woke before the alarm and listened to the apartment breathe. For a while, I didn't move, as if stillness could keep the fragile good from noticing it had arrived and deciding to leave. My mother sent a picture of her empty teacup on a saucer she's had since before I could reach the counter. "Refills are proof of hope," she wrote. I stared at the message until it rearranged a few stubborn shelves inside me, then sent back a photo of my sneakers by the door with the caption, "Going to try again." The schedule said fitting, 2 rehearsals, and a late studio block that would start honest and end philosophical. In the van, Taehyung leaned his head against the window like he was eavesdropping on the weather. Jimin wore a beanie low, the heaviest part of him, the small bruise fading around his knuckle. He flexed it with absent care, then caught me watching and lifted it like a victory he didn't want to brag about. "Almost boring," he said. "Perfect," I answered. Hoseok had already claimed the first joke of the day, something about how the city keeps stressing, like it can't decide what it wants to be. And Namjoon was revising the kind of sentence that looks simple once he's finished bruising it into clarity. Yoongi scrolled through stems that weren't supposed to follow him out of the studio, but did, because guardianship is portable. Seokjin hummed something suspiciously close to the chorus of a song we haven't admitted we're writing. At the fitting, fabric did its usual magic trick of turning into identity. Stylists moved around us like cartographers drawing borders we could live in for an evening. The brand had sent looks that were almost right and asked for our opinion as if they hoped we'd say, "Perfect, ship it." Taehyung stood in front of the mirror and tilted his head, a museum visitor deciding how much to let the painting change him. "It's fine," he said, "if the story is that we're wearing the clothes." He looked at me through the reflection. "But we're telling something else." Jimin adjusted a sleeve and found the place where cloth stops being costume and becomes a line in a poem. We asked for small changes. A looser shoulder, a sleeve that allowed breath, a hem that treated movement like a right, not a chore. 3 minutes later, the room felt more like ours. The stylist exhaled. "You're good at this," she said. "We're tired of playing strangers," I replied. She wrote something down that I hope she keeps for herself. Rehearsal began with a conversation that wasn't about dance. We ran counts while talking around the thing the way you circle a sore muscle, testing it without pressing. The blackout that wasn't had given us a new kind of courage, and with courage comes housekeeping. Namjoon stood in the center and drew a map in the air. "2 agreements," he said. "One we already made. We believe the long version before the short. The other, we're allowed to update the way we stand together without calling it betrayal." No one objected. Hoseo clapped twice, like punctuation. Yoongi, eyes half closed, listened to silence and found it agreeable. Seokjin made a face that translated as, finally. Halfway through the run, an email arrived from a festival we've headlined before. The kind that claims your whole nervous system, and then thanks you for the privilege. The slot was generous, the lighting plan was ambitious. The note in the margin was not. We suggest separating certain members for narrative contrast and camera blocking. There it was again, the professional noun for a thing that hurts when it's done too often. I felt the old impatience lift its head. Jimin's jaw set. Taehyung rolled the ring on his finger as if comforting it. I typed a reply and let it sit in drafts until my pulse agreed to negotiate. When I finally sent it, it was short. We offer contrast without separation. Our narrative is a bridge. The coordinator wrote back a brisk. Understood. Whether they understood or obeyed, I didn't know. But the line was on the page. And sometimes paper is braver than people until they catch up. The afternoon came with a surprise inspection from the part of the universe that thinks it's funny. A reporter slipped into the back of the rehearsal under the pretense of process coverage and asked if he could grab a few quotes. Permits existed. Denial would have created a scene louder than the acceptance. We agreed with the kind of caution you use when you let a stray cat inside for the first time. Hands visible, movement slow. He asked about the song that wasn't a song last week and suddenly is. He asked about the clip that turned a blackout into a choir. He asked, inevitably, about tension and healing. Jimin answered first, voice warm but not soft. Healing isn't an arrow, he said. It's a spiral. Sometimes you pass the same landmark from a better altitude. The reporter blinked and wrote it down as if it had a price. Taehyung added, we're architects who forgot we also had to be plumbers. The room laughed enough to make the metaphor survive the paper. I said, we're practicing long versions in a short world. The reporter looked satisfied. I felt the urge to apologize to the day for letting an answer out into weather we don't control. Yoongi tilted his head as if to say, don't worry, truth is waterproof. Evening brought the studio, and with it the place where work and belief trade jackets. We started with the bridge. The plan we'd sketched over noodles 2 days ago looked sane on paper. In the room, it asked for more honesty than ink can carry. Yoongi killed 2 layers without ceremony. We're hiding, he said. Let the voices be the risk. Namjoon shifted a verb from certainty to promise. The difference altered the temperature. Jimin tried a harmony that landed too pretty, grimaced, and then found the slightly cracked one that lets light in. Taehyung's low line sat a fraction earlier than comfort. He kept it there, building trust out of friction. Seokjin stayed at the mic after his pass and waited, a small act that changes a room's courage. Hoseok recorded hand claps until the air itself started keeping time. We took a break we didn't deserve and wandered to the roof because the city had decided to be cinematic. Lights like scattered coins. A breeze that felt like an apology for every day it had been unkind.